Hi and welcome to another Fusion Insulation video. In this video, I'm going to go through the top 5 mistakes, errors, problems we've encountered down through the years doing hundreds if not thousands of metal frame buildings. These are issues that when we arrive on site, even though we might have advised the customers in advance of what we require to get an ideal job done, we often find haven't been done. So let's dive right in and check out our top 5, starting with number 5. And number 5, we find the biggest recurring issue is people leaving their junk in the way. Their stored goods, their valuables, their engines, their shelving full of filters, spanners, power tools, and we arrive and we find the shed full of this gear, and the customer innocently looking at us, expecting us to magically spray the shed and have no risk of splattering their expensive equipment with spray foam. So my advice, my top 5 tip is, guys, if you're having a spray foam company in to spray your building, you have to get as much of the clutter out of the steel container, out of the shed, out of the barge, out of the steel building as possible. The more stuff you remove, the more accessible the sheeting, the steel frame is to the spray foam contractors, the better the finish. And also the cheaper the job. When we're pricing a job, we price in a difficulty factor. If there's a huge amount of masking up to be done in terms of masking machinery, benches, equipment that the customer simply has no intention to remove, that costs more. You're actually paying for that because we have to pay our guys to mask all that gear. Plus it slows down the spraying. In a worst case scenario, we have to bring in a telescopic boom lift to boom over the equipment. Now, sometimes this is inevitable because you'll be dealing with workshops that have fixed benches bolted to the floor. They'll have cranes in situ, overhead cranes, overhead gantries. That's unavoidable. We totally get that, and we work around that. But it's the inconsequential stuff. A guy has his motorbike in the way, his boat in the way, laundry, clotheslines, you name it, we've come across it. And it baffles me that people can expect us to do a good job with all the junk in the way. So guys, please, 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 whether it's us or some other company, declutter your shed. Get anything out of there that shouldn't be there or that can be moved during the spray process. Make plans, make arrangements for storage of that equipment outside, and it'll result in a better quality finish, a more economical job, a lower price. You'll be pleased you did it. So now we move on to number 4, top tip or recommendation by us, having covered and sprayed hundreds of steel buildings down through the years, maybe even thousands, I've lost count. So the 4th item I'd strongly recommend is fix leaks, fix holes before the spray foaming takes place. Now, before I move on from that subject, I have to state that spray foam is a wonderful way to fix leaks and holes in roofs and sheds and buildings, and people often get us exactly for that purpose. But we have to be careful here. Spray foam is primarily an insulation. It's not a roofing system. The fact that it can fix holes and leaks, and often does fantastically well, is almost an accidental byproduct of the system. But I would never sell it as a leak prevention system. So guys, go up on top. If you've got a drip on the floor, it's coming in on top. It's coming in from a pinhole leak, rusting. Get up on top of your roof before we come in. Use bitumen products, use sealer products. These leaks can be fixed quite easily if you get up on top before we come in. Why before? Well, if you take a steel container and you're now dancing around on top of it after we've spray foamed it, well, there's a good chance you might displace the spray foam. If the roof deflects badly, well, the spray foam can deflect so much, but eventually it might crack. So get those leaks fixed, especially leaks in the roof, but also holes in the sides. It's not unusual for us to be asked into spray a shipping container and the hole in the side of the shipping container that a small dog would crawl through. Okay, I'll admit, I'll hold my hand up. We often spray over those nose for the customer, and we cross our fingers and hope everything will work out. But that's not the ideal. So if it's the side of a shipping container, grind it back, weld a steel plate in, and we can spray over it quite happily. Roofs, as I said, use bitumen products. There's some fantastic sealing products on the market today that'll fix leaks quite easily for you. So that's tip number 4. Fix the leaks, guys. Get the building weatherproof before we spray, and then you'll have the perfect combination that if you've missed any tiny pinhole leaks, the spray foam will sort it for you. But if there's any major leaks there, get them fixed so that you're not relying on the last line of defense, the spray foam, to cure it for you. Okay, let's move on from there. Hi, so we're on to tip number 3. It doesn't come up very often, but it comes up more often than I'd like when we're attend on site, and that's to do with vehicles, goods, equipment, powerboats, canoes, the whole 9 yards that we find adjacent to the buildings and shipping containers that we're asked to spray. So what's the problem here? Well, guys, what you've got to remember is that when we spray foam, we're spraying it at high pressure. It's a mist. It goes on as a liquid and turns into a solid foam. That's one of the joys of the product. However, there is a great risk of collateral misting, collateral spray damage that drifts out of the building through gutters, through openings, and there is a big risk of that travelling 20, 30 metres, depending on the wind conditions that day, and can land on powerboats. If you've got your Porsche in the way, if you've got your Mercedes in the way, it's not unknown for windscreens to get covered in this fine mist and can be very difficult to remove. So top tip number 3, is it wise? Is it safe to leave it there? And the answer, of course, is no, it's not. We regularly show up on jobs with cars parked right beside the shipping container, and the owners all doe-eyed, thinking that there is no risk to their precious goods. So think about it. We're spraying a high pressure liquid. The liquid rebounds off the surface and creates a very fine mist that can drift depending on the wind conditions. So keep all your goods around the container. I previously covered goods that are inside the container to remove them. But once you remove them, get them as far away from the container as possible. Move all trucks, lorries, vehicles, boats, laundry, anything that is lawnmowers. So that's tip number 3, guys. So we're on to top tip number 2. Top tip number 2, in our experience, it doesn't always happen, but it happens with a fair degree of frequency nonetheless. And that is, we show up on a job and the metal surfaces are too wet to spray. So what can cause that? Well, if you've been washing the surfaces the day before and there hasn't been sufficient time to dry, we show up and there's beads of water on the surface. Now, again, we can deal with that, but would we rather it not be there? Of course we would. Condensation is a huge problem on metal buildings. In a lot of cases, that's the sole reason we're being asked in to spray the building, is to stop condensation dropping down on equipment, machinery, etc. So if you look at the weather conditions the day before, the night before we're due in, and if it's predicting temperatures below 5 degrees centigrade, below the dew point, well then it'd be wise to put in a space heater, to put in a steel container, put in an electric heater overnight, so that you're keeping a bit of heat in the container to avoid condensation. When we show up, if the surfaces are dry, it means we can crack on with our job. We're having to spend less time tying up your building, tying up your facility. We're in and out quicker. Again, it gives a smoother finish, because if you spray over, it can happen, not always, if you spray over surfaces that have beads of water, well, it'll show up as a blister or a bubble underneath the foam. It's not a deal breaker. Some people don't mind. Some people, when we explain this to them, say, yeah, I don't mind blisters and bubbles on the foam, but we'd really rather not have them there. So that's top tip number 2. Heat the building, warm up the building, have the surfaces dry for us before we commence spraying. And now we're on to top tip number 1. So this is advice we give people who have recently purchased a steel container. So we ask them to have all their cabling, their what we call first fix cabling, in place. If they're planning to put in shelving, if they're planning to put in overhead lights in the container, we recommend them putting in and welding in the steel conduits, the shelving struts, etc. Have those in place and have your cables routed in to these ducts before we come in. Again, it comes back to points I've raised previously. We're trying to avoid a situation where there are a lot of obstacles in the way. So if there's bundles of cables hanging down untidily, they will affect the spray pattern. They will make the finish around those areas look extremely untidy and humpy bumpy. Large light fittings would be better left off until we get our spraying done. As I say, first fix cabling not an issue, but put it in steel conduit, plastic box conduit. Have all this done. On the screen now you'll be seeing pictures of just such a container where we advise the customer in advance to have their first fix cabling put in steel ducts. They wanted lights down the centre of the tunnel. We advise them to weld ducting struts onto the ceiling so that once we'd sprayed, they could come in afterwards, fix their lights and mount shelving on the sides, and it worked out a treat. So that's top tip number 1. And guys, thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe, helps my channel grow. I plan to have more exciting and interesting videos so we can spread the good news about spray foam to a wider audience. Thanks again.